Hello, and welcome to the Pop Off PC Mags show. We talk about video games, games we have been playing, games we like, news, industry trends, whatever, anything having to do with video games. It's a broad category, lots to talk about. I'm Jordan Miner, joined with Will Greenwald, my colleague at PC
Hello.
Mag. Hello, Will. And today we're talking about the new Nintendo Switch, a device that does not officially exist yet, but probably exists, is probably coming out within, well, we'll get into that. Will, you wrote a story kind of speculating on what this device might be. There's been a lot of other reports coming out. And we just kind of wanted, as big Nintendo fans, as Nintendo pundits, we just wanted to kind of talk about what this device might be and what people might have to look forward to.
Yeah, there have been a bunch of reports, most recently several from Bloomberg of all outlets, and I'm sort of very curious about their sources. But there have been scattered reports since at least like 2019 that Nintendo put out a new Switch that'll be more powerful, et cetera, et cetera.
So yeah, like kind of
Nintendo,
going back that far, like yeah, there have been rumors of this device for years. Like even going back to before the Switch Lite, like that was kind of the second half. There would be like
yeah,
there'd be a smaller one coming out and then a more powerful one coming out. And now it's been years since the Switch Lite. But at this point, do you think there's any doubt that this device exists?
not really. The thing that really pushed it over for me was another report that Nvidia is apparently discontinuing the Tegra X1 Plus chip, which is basically the system on a chip that the Nintendo Switch uses. So either Nintendo bought them all up so they can keep making Switches, or they're going to put out a new Switch with some different chips in it. And it's probably the latter, and they're probably working with Nvidia to get some new hardware going for it.
That's interesting about the Nvidia connections that even Nintendo using Nvidia for the Switch in the first place was kind of a big change for them. They had traditionally gone with like ARM for their mobile stuff and like kind of AMD derived things for their consoles. I'm not a huge chips person, but that was
Yeah, it's definitely been interesting to see, but the big question is sort of, is Nintendo going to stay with them for whatever the next generation is? And that's also a question of, is it going to be a new generation? And I think it's probably not going to be, because if anything, there's going to be like a half step. The Switch has been around for 4 years. It's still seeing a ton of popularity. And, Nintendo doesn't have a huge need to make like a massive jump in tech where it's like a whole new thing, like the even arguably the lines are blurry with the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X, where it's like a new generation, but what do generations mean anymore? But it's probably
right.
going to be a pretty good half step up, kind of like with the new Nintendo DS over new Nintendo 3DS over the Nintendo 3DS, which was like more powerful. It could run certain games that the 3DS couldn't, but otherwise it's pretty much just a 3DS.
Or even comparing to other consoles, we saw last generation of PS4 Pro and
Yep.
Xbox One X. So that's definitely becoming more of an accepted thing in game consoles. Granted, also something that's been very common in mobile devices for the iPhone and Android phones for like years and years. Like the Tegra is a mobile like chipset, so the idea of them, and the Switch is a tablet. So
Basically, yeah.
the idea of them kind of migrating to that kind of a model of just more iterative devices, maybe short amount of times, I think is actually a good idea. For as someone who really enjoys the Switch and wants them to just kind of keep that concept for a long time,
Yep,
like,
so do I.
I don't need like an entire new like paradigm or gimmick or whatever. I will just take a more powerful Switch, and it sounds like that's what they're doing.
Yeah, and also especially for handhelds, Nintendo loves reiterating on things. There were how many versions of the Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, the DS. Like there's the Lite, the Plot, like the XL. So many different versions of the previous handhelds and they put out the Switch Lite too. So it definitely seems like they would make something that could be a bit more powerful, but not necessarily the same, but still basically the same Switch, just with more to it.
So I guess let's speculate then on what we're expecting maybe then this power difference to be, and how what it looks on paper versus what kind of gains you'll get in actual performance. Um, I think the big kind of rumor most recently is that they would be using Nvidia's DLSS technology, which allows them to run the game natively at a fairly low resolution, and then use machine learning AI to kind of extrapolate a higher res image without necessarily needing the more powerful computing power to pull that off natively.
That's actually one of the things I'm kind of a bit skeptical about, because upscaling, up converting to a higher resolution from lower resolution is something pretty mathematically simple, but it's not going to look great. You want to use every trick to sort of make the processing look excellent. but I'm not really sure if DLSS is going to be on the new Switch just because it was a Tegra-based system, and it still ostensibly is. And DLSS is currently only on NVIDIA's RTX GPUs, the 2060 and above. And that's PC hardware that is still absurdly hard to get your hands on for consumers. And it costs more and consumes more power than their Tegra-based SoCs. So I'm a bit skeptical about DLSS unless NVIDIA has brought some really power friendly and cost friendly tricks out to make it available on a smaller scale chip, but it's certainly possible. I do think that they're going to have something that outputs at 4K, maybe has just an upscaler like the Xbox One S that also did, it can output at 4K, but the number of games that would natively be 4K very low for the Xbox One X2, for the PS4 Pro. It's just a lot easier for any hardware to have lower resolution rendering and then upconvert it to output to whatever the native display is that it's connected to. And that's what I think is very likely. Not sure if it's DLSS, but if it's what Bloomberg says, so who knows?
No, I mean you test out a lot of like retro hardware also, and
Oh yeah,
that involves a lot of having to get very old, very low res games to look like not garbage on a TV. So like I guess
yeah,
how much faith then do you kind of have in this sort of upscaling tech then? Because like as we get more Switch games that are like very low res,
yeah.
and as more people get 4K TVs, I think that this is like a problem that they've recognized. Like I don't know exactly the way they'll get there, but I do think that like some kind of 4K something like needs to be a part of this thing.
It is. And the thing is, it is easy to output video at 4K at this point. Making it look good is another story. If it's a 1080p signal, you could just like quadruple the number of pixels, and there you go. And it's the same thing and just looks blocky. That's fine. Most advanced TVs today have various processing that basically tries to detect where edges are and smooth things out and make things look sharper without making things look blotchy, which is a big problem for weak upscaling. And for retro hardware, it gets even more complicated when you have one side being emulators that basically say, okay, we're just going to render the sprites of this game at a higher resolution mathematically. And on the other side, you have hardware that emulates the original hardware and then uses really complex sort of HDMI upconversion to make it look a lot better. There are a lot of ways it can happen. DLSS isn't the only way. Like there's almost certainly going to be some form of 4K upconversion for when it's docked in the TV. The question is how advanced it's going to be. I mean, Nintendo doesn't do a whole lot of showing off graphical power, and I can you really imagine a Nintendo Direct where they say, here's the new Nintendo Switch and it has NVIDIA's DLSS? Like, have they ever brought out any kind of branded processing feature on any of their previous systems
No, I
where they're
mean,
like,
granted, they may not brand it, but that could still be what's going on.
it
Um,
could be.
they
But
could have
then the
some
question
weird.
is,
It's like when they did with. It's like with the new 3DS, and they had the face tracking, the improved face tracking for the 3D.
yep.
Um, they did point that out. Do you think it would be something that would be built into the dock, or it would be is part of just the unit itself? I don't know how because people I remember when the Switch was first kind of being revealed, people think, oh, maybe the dock has like an external GPU in it or something. They were saying no, that connection just wouldn't be fast enough. Um, between that and the system itself to kind of have something like that. But do you think that the upscaling could be something in the dock?
It's definitely possible. For raw upscaling, there's definitely like you can just put a circuit into the dock and then you wouldn't need to have it on the Switch itself. Whether that would be DLSS or if it would be powered by NVIDIA or just have something completely different, that's possible. Like there are a lot of pretty low latency upconversion devices you can use that will take a lower resolution game system and upconvert it to a higher one, and they can look very good, or the cheap ones can look terrible. But yeah, there's definitely a possibility that it's simply like here's a more powerful upscaler that's just in the dock that the tablet doesn't use. Like that would make a lot of sense. It'd probably make the dock even more expensive, and as it is, it's kind of overpriced for what's basically a dock.
It's a piece of it's a piece of plastic right now.
Yeah,
Yeah. Um,
uh, maybe.
so I think part of the reason we're so skeptical is just we've covered Nintendo for years and years. We just have a
Mhm.
sense of just their conservatism, their slowness for kind of reacting to market trends. But I do think that something you can also count on them on is to be like opportunistic about like just getting a good deal on something.
Oh
So
yeah.
another rumor of this device is that they've secured a very good deal with Samsung to get slightly larger 7-inch OLED screens that would kind of like maybe like fill out that bezel, so it would be the same size but a bigger screen. And
That'd be
that
pretty
would be
great.
great. We
Yeah.
say that simultaneously. Yeah, OLED. Going back to the Vita, OLED screens look very nice. That would, I think, definitely add to the premiumness of this product. So
OLED
again,
screens are definitely excellent, and for phones and stuff, like the 720p resolution, super low for a phone now, especially for like a 7-inch screen, which is too big for a phone. So being able to like find a home on a Switch sounds like it could be a great deal for both Nintendo and Samsung.
So where I'm going with this is that maybe there could be something similar with Nvidia, where it's like they're like, the Switch is very successful. We want to keep this partnership going. We want to get we want it like to kind of keep reaffirming Nvidia's presence in gaming. We will work with you to get this DLSS type of chip into your device at a price that is agreeable to you, especially if we're already discontinuing this other chip anyway.
Yeah,
Um, that's the way I could see something like that happening. Um,
that's definitely possible, and I think it's very likely Nintendo is like going to Nvidia and saying, "Hey, give us a chip that'll make the Switch work." And the question is like, what'll it be closest to? Because the Tegra is a system on a chip. It's the CPU and GPU all in one package. It's built for tablets and mobile devices. It's very different from like their RTX graphics cards. And I've pinned down two sort of out of the box upgraded kind of Tegras that NVIDIA has available now that are used for different things, but would be good candidates for an upgraded Switch, but still is
mhm.
architecturally very similar. The TX2 Jetson, which is basically a Tegra X2, although they're not using the Tegra name that much, and the Xavier, which is an even more powerful chip that is still an SoC. And for both of those, I think one is used for like developing autonomous driving, perhaps, and one is for AI learning. So they're very specific developer kits right now, but the parts are there that would make every amount of sense for we're going to put something like this into a Switch just because it's the same thing but more powerful. Now, if they're going to add like the Turing cores that the NVIDIA GPUs for with RTX can do with DLSS, that'd be really impressive. Again, the question is just like how long is the battery going to last at that point, and how expensive are the chips going to be? Because
True.
I don't think Nintendo wants this to be higher than $400. I think that would be like the hard cutoff for a more advanced Switch.
Yeah, that was another kind of rumor floating around that it could be like up to that, which I think even that's too expensive personally. The
It
PS4
is,
or PS5 costs $400.
yeah.
But so I guess kind of moving beyond just the sort of hardware we're expecting. Now, granted, I think we expect this to just kind of clean up existing Switch games. Um, but as we move into this next generation, as developers are now making games that target the PS5 and the Xbox Series X, but still want to get some version of their game onto the Switch, do you think that Nintendo will allow games that only run on this more powerful device?
I think eventually, yes. They might have one or two like really tempting ones that they'll say you can only play it on the new Nintendo Switch. But for a good year or two, they're probably going to have a lot of bleed over and a lot of like it'll look better, but not exclusive. Like I don't think Nintendo wants this to be a new generation, and I think they're
Hmm.
going to be pretty clear about that. There might be a few only for the new Switch games, but well, big question is even with the upgraded graphics, is it going to come anywhere close to the PS5 and uh, Xbox Series X that the developers will be able to like even scale it to work on the Nintendo hardware. It's definitely possible, and I think third parties it's viable, but it's just as likely that they might go with more cloud gaming of like, hey, you want to play this high end game, just connect to the cloud and get a streaming license.
Yes, that's something that we were talking about earlier. Yeah, my personal theory is that for games that are too powerful for the base Switch, they will allow them to be only on the new Switch if they also offer a cloud version that any Switch can use. So they've already begun testing that with Control and Hitman, and those work as well as any other streaming solution. So I think that's a pretty good compromise of not 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 throwing away the 80 plus million existing Switch owners, but getting your game on the new Switch where it would just otherwise be impossible to get it on there before.
That'd make a
Uh,
lot of sense.
yeah. Now we've been saying new Switch a lot, but I think also something that to speculate here is what would this thing be called? Would it your theory is that it'd be called the new Nintendo Switch, following things like the new Nintendo 3DS, new Super Mario Brothers, new Pokemon Snap coming out a few weeks
Yeah,
here.
Nintendo likes new, and They've made clear that they're kind of okay with some ambiguity between different iterations of devices, like, with the confusing new Nintendo 3DS, that they could just call it the new Nintendo Switch and it'd just be, okay, this is the more powerful one. Super Nintendo Switch is another pretty strong possibility. I'm really doubtful of Switch Pro just because that doesn't feel like Nintendo style. Like, again, they don't really emphasize the power of pretty much anything they put out. Like, it'll be more powerful, but they won't be like, oh yeah, this is the pro version. Like, this is for pro gamers. It's like pro gamers and Nintendo, not necessarily the same branding circles. So I'm not quite convinced on a Switch Pro.
I agree with you on Pro. I don't think that's the name. Also, PS4 Pro already exists, and also people have already just been saying that so much. I feel like they wouldn't want to just kind of hop on that. I really don't like the name New Nintendo Switch. I think that was a bad name for the new 3DS. I think that's
Yeah, it's
weirdly
not a great name.
I think it's weirdly ambiguous. I would hope that after the stuff with the Wii U, that they would like have like just learned a little bit about like having clear product names. Like the Switch itself is a great name.
Yeah.
Um, so I hope and would think that it would be Nintendo Switch like blank, like XL or Advance or something that would then also make
Switch
it a
Plus,
count
maybe.
Switch
Advance would
Plus,
actually make a lot of sense.
something that would make it a counterpart to the Switch Lite also. I think having that kind of parallel naming scheme of the Switch and then this other word, I think makes more sense than the new Nintendo Switch, personally.
Yeah, it's definitely possible. And I also think Super Nintendo Switch is a great name, but it's also like calling back for before a lot of their audience was necessarily born. So I don't think they'll have as much appeal
I was
as
born the
people
same
do.
year the SNES came out.
Right.
Not to help make people feel a certain type of way. Now, not the last kind of big part of these rumors is when it would come out potentially. Bloomberg was saying could come out this holiday season, which I think would be very aggressive. But I think that it would come out at the latest next March, at the end of this fiscal year, is my theory.
Yeah, I'd probably shoot for March next year too. I think they'd likely announce it maybe Q3, like mid-fall this year, and just have sort of, give it time for people to get excited over it and, hype it with more games that are coming out. Because also the games that are coming, like there's either the long ones that we haven't heard about for a long time, like SMT5 and Bayonetta 3 and Metroid Prime 4, where it's questionable if they still exist. And then there's the games that are like coming out next month.
Right.
So I think they need some time to really fluff up more appeal of like, hey, here are some hot games that are coming out. And if any of those big three ones, or if God willing, Nintendo announces a new F-Zero or Pilot Wings, I'd be down with that.
I think you're leaving out a very conspicuous big game from that list you said there.
Which one?
Zelda. I think that
Oh,
Zelda.
yeah.
I think Breath of the Wild 2 has to launch with this device. I think that I feel like that might not happen, but I think it has to happen.
Yeah, I think so too. I haven't sort of counted Breath of the Wild 2 along with those three others because like I'm very confident that it still exists.
True. Yeah.
And
Yeah. It exists. How crazy that game exists the most out of
yeah.
some of those other ones. Um,
Uh
but
yeah, end of the year probably announcement, and then March would be make a lot of sense.
5-year anniversary of the Switch. New launch, new Zelda game. 100 million units. 100 years.com. Will Greenwald, thank you so much
Yep.
for joining us. Um, yeah, we just gotta wait and see what this new Switch ends up being. I mean, that's just video games in general these days. We gotta just wait a little longer than maybe we were expecting, because things are real rough right now for everyone in all parts
Yeah.
of the world and all industries. Um, in the meantime, lots of great Switch games you can play right now. Your Switch you already have. I recently got these dumb Hori Pro Joy-Con things to play Monster Hunter.
Hey, how are you liking those?
It feels really nice. It looks dumb as hell, but it feels super nice.
That actually makes me think of something I'm hopeful for the new Switch, but I doubt it. The Joy-Cons are fine for what they are, but they're far from perfect. The shallow sticks have drift. The buttons aren't super great. If Nintendo were to announce Joy-Con Pros to go with the new Switch, that would be awesome. Like, get something a little bit bigger, a little bit more ergonomic, not quite as handheld friendly, but still like all the appeal of the Joy-Con. That'd be awesome. But I'm not counting on it.
There's a lot of stuff they could do for this thing, but yeah, we just have to just wait and see what the new Switch is. But in the meantime, Will, thanks for joining us.
Yep. No
You can
problem.
read his article, The New Nintendo Switch, Everything You Need to Know on PC Mag right now, has more details about some of these rumors and speculation. We have tons of other Switch coverage, best Switch games, all sorts of stuff like that. And yeah, thanks for joining us, and we'll talk to you next time.
Till next time.